Hey guys, so for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about this idea of doing something. In fact, that's the name of the series, Do Something. So we're going to be spending about 4 weeks talking about injustice in our world. I think that this is a topic that is something we can relate to, that we've seen a lot in the news and on social media over the last several months and even the last several years, but it has really been something that has been highlighted recently and something that I think is important for us to know about, to know what we should be doing about it, to understand it, and to see it when it's happening around us. And so we're going to dive into this for the next just the next few weeks. I was thinking about this idea of injustice, and I really think that's why I look at like all the superhero movies that are out there, right? I mean, there's something appealing about all these superhero movies. I can't even begin to think of how many have been made in the last 10 years, but I did a quick Google search to try to find out, and the first thing that popped up was top 50 superhero movies in the last decade. And so if someone took the time to rank the top 50, that there's a lot, right? And so what is the appeal, right? What is it that's so great about superheroes or superhero movies? What draws people? Why do they make so much money at the box office? And I think what it is I think people love a good hero because of what they do. They solve a problem. They fight the bad guys. They're brave. They do some crazy cool stuff. They have awesome powers, right? But basically, the main thing is that they see something in the world that is wrong, that's unjust, that's happening, that isn't fair, and they do something about it. And there are times in life where we just wish that superheroes were there, right? That someone would do something to right the wrongs that we see, to do something to help me out, to make things better in the world, to change what's happening in the world around us, or to make things better for those who aren't being treated fairly, to solve the problem, to do something. And so that's what we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks. We're going to be talking about some of the biggest areas in life where we all wish someone would just do something. We're going to talk about some of the things in the world that aren't quite right, that seem unfair. We're going to be talking about the injustice that exists around us. And so I want you to take just a minute here before we dive into it too much and talk in your group. When I say the word injustice, what comes to mind? Okay, so we're going to spend the next few weeks really unpacking this word and talking a lot more about what it means, but I just want to start with something very basic and simple just to kind of get us rolling. Just this idea that injustice is something that isn't right, it's unfair, or it's unequal, right? And there's so much more to that, but just to kind of give us that simple thing to start with, that's what we're going to roll with. And I think really I probably don't need to define it for most of you. I mean, maybe even if you can't say in words what it is, you know what it is, right? You know injustice when you see it. And for most of us, something came to mind the minute you heard the word. When I said, what do you think about when you think about injustice? You probably thought of examples. Maybe it was something big and global like human trafficking or poverty or world hunger, but maybe it was something local or something in your own family or in your own school that seems so unfair, something that's right around the corner. Maybe you're experiencing some kind of injustice personally and you know that pain all too well. And what I'm getting at is, I think something comes to mind for all of us though. In fact, that's one of the things that I really admire about Gen Z. I mean, I think of any generation in history, you guys are aware of injustices happening in the world, maybe more than any other generation. And the real question is not, does injustice exist, right? We know that. The question is, why doesn't somebody do something? And that's the question we're going to be wrestling with for this series, is what does it look like? Whose job is it to do something about the injustices in the world? And for some of you, this might feel really heavy. I mean, you've been thinking about injustice a long time because you experience it yourself. It's part of your life. It's part of your experience. It's part of what you understand about this world. And you've seen how it has affected your family and your friends, and this topic, it hurts. It's personal. But on the flip side, maybe some of you haven't really experienced that hurt of injustice. And maybe when you were younger, you never really thought about what it was like to not have access to things like education, or to experience racism or food insecurity. I mean, I know that was the life that I had growing up. I mean, I was fortunate. I didn't really know a lot about what injustice looked like because I didn't experience much of it in my own life. Sure, I had things that I thought were unfair. My parents didn't do what I wanted them to do, or my teacher didn't give me the grade I thought I should. But really, not much, right? Nothing in my life that would really make me truly aware of what injustice is. And if I'm honest, I know that I have missed injustices happening around me, that I have walked past them without noticing, or even if I'm really honest, man, I think there are probably times where I've seen it and done nothing about it. But they're not a common part of my life, and I don't have to think about it every day. I don't have to live with that injustice every day. And so it's easy to not only forget what is happening around me, but to not see it, to not notice it, to pretend like it doesn't exist. But my hope is that as you have gotten older and you've started seeing some of these things on social media and in the news and other places, that you have realized that there's a lot of injustice in the world around you, that you've become more aware of it. And maybe you found yourself asking this question that we already brought up, this idea, why doesn't someone do something about it? I mean, why are there students that never get in trouble when they should, while other students always get in trouble even when they shouldn't? Why do people still act like it's okay to make jokes that are racist or sexist? Why does that guy continue to be bullied but no one seems to care enough to do anything about it? Why does that one person in my group of friends go home to a house that doesn't feel safe, whereas I get to go home to a house with a good family that cares about me, that supports me? Why are there kids in our community who don't get to eat if school's not in session? Why are 3 meals a day not normal for everyone? I just want you to take a minute as we're talking about these things, to just in your group, to think about some of the injustices that you have witnessed personally in your family, in your school, in the city of Greensboro. And I want you to think about these things and maybe talk about some of them. What are some of these injustices that you've witnessed? Name them. And then think about this. Why do you think it's sometimes easy to miss the injustices that are happening around us? Guys, we aren't the first one to have this problem, right? I mean, these are hard questions that we're asking, but these are questions that have been being asked for a long time. Injustice is not a new thing. In fact, Scripture is full of examples of injustice. I mean, you think about like the book of Exodus, and the Israelites are slaves in Egypt, and God's heart breaks for them, and so he sends Moses to free the people, right? In the book of Psalms, David laments over and over again throughout the book about injustices that he's facing from his enemies. I think of the parable of the Good Samaritan, where this man is beaten and he's treated unjustly. He experiences injustice in how he's treated by the priest and the Levite, and only the Samaritan takes pity on him and treats him the way that he should. The woman caught in adultery, you think about this woman caught in adultery that Jesus doesn't condemn, and yes, she had sinned, right? You're like, well, that's not, I mean, she did something wrong, and that's true, but we can also assume in that story that she was not treated the same as the man who was with her. I mean, injustice is all throughout Scripture, and we see God's heart towards that he doesn't want us to go through it, that he hates it, that he seeks ways for justice to happen, for people to be cared for and people to be treated fairly. And so this is not a new concept, and it's not something that goes unnoticed by God. God has a lot to say about injustice in this world. And we see it throughout Scripture. In Leviticus 19, God commands the Israelites, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. Psalm 82:3, he tells us, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. In Isaiah 1:17, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Luke 11:42, woe to you Pharisees, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. Psalm 31:9, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. In Zechariah 7:9-10, it says, dispense true justice and practice kindness and compassion, each to his brother, and do not oppress the widow or the orphan, the stranger or the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. I mean, these are just a few of many verses that talk about justice and this idea of what God thinks about treating people the right way and taking care of those who are in need. In fact, this idea of treating people fairly, of practicing justice, is so common that Micah, in the book of Micah, he speaks of it as if it's common knowledge, as if it's a reminder, right? Micah 6:8 says, he has shown you what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Guys, injustice is a big deal to God, and it should be a big deal to us as well. In fact, if I can give you one more verse, Proverbs 29:7 says, the righteous are concerned for the rights of the poor, but the wicked do not understand such concern. God is very clear in his word that if we claim to be followers of him, we should be concerned about injustice. That we should see it, notice it, be aware of it when it happens, and be willing to take action. And that's where this all starts, right? This idea of seeing what is happening around you, noticing the injustices that are happening daily in our world. And this can be difficult, especially if you don't experience injustice in your own world. If you don't feel it in your own daily life every day when you wake up, it's not a part of your life, it's not a part of your world. That can make it easy to assume that, man, it's not that bad, right? It's not that big of a deal, but it is, and it's happening every single day in the world around us. And we all have room to grow in this. And so I just want to give you 3 things that you can start doing to help you see the injustice around you so you can do something about it. And the first one is this, it's get close enough to see. Get close enough to see. How do we do this? Well, there are a few things we can do, right? For starters, we can pray that God would help us to see the way that he sees. And this is huge. We should all be making this a regular part of our prayer life, right? But then if we really want to get close enough to see it, we need to actually spend some time with people who are different from us. And that doesn't come naturally, does it? Like, we naturally gravitate toward people who are just like us. In order to see what is going on in the world, though, guys, we have to get to know people outside of our circle. We have to get close enough to see it. We have to strike up conversations with people that we wouldn't normally strike up conversation with. And so do that. Talk to someone new in your class. Sit next to someone different from you in the cafeteria. Get a job that will help you meet people outside of your school. Volunteer somewhere. Put yourself on the path to interact with different people. And you can make an effort to learn about others' experiences on your own too. I mean, you can watch a movie about injustice. You can do some research on organizations who are working to help. Start discovering what's happening in the world and in your community. Number 2, be curious enough to listen. Be curious enough to listen. The quickest way to see injustice, guys, is to listen to the people who are experiencing it. When someone tells you about experiencing injustice, listen. Don't just listen. Try to learn. Learn about their experience. Learn about what they're going through. Start trying to imagine yourself in their shoes. What would it be like to experience those things? And here's a heads up, guys, if you decide to do this, it will make you uncomfortable, especially if it's the kind of injustice that you've never experienced, or worse, the kind that maybe you didn't realize you've participated in. And this is difficult. I mean, let's be honest, we avoid things that make us feel uncomfortable. I mean, how often do we would rather dive and talk to someone on the actual phone instead of texting them? Why? Because it's more uncomfortable. It's easier to text somebody, right? I can hide behind this and just type instead of actually speaking to someone. And we all do this. It's just a part of who we are. We hate being uncomfortable. But in this case, guys, discomfort isn't necessarily a bad thing. It might even be a sign that you're beginning to see things the way God sees them. So keep listening, try to learn, and when you hear about injustice, be curious and listen, even if it's a little uncomfortable. Number 3, be courageous enough to name it. And that means, guys, if it's wrong, say it's wrong. If it's unfair, call it that. When you see injustice around you or even in you, be courageous enough to call it what it is. Identifying injustice takes away some of its power because we can't change what isn't seen, what isn't acknowledged, what isn't talked about. But when we name it, it becomes more real, right? This is the hardest part for some of us. It's risky, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, but it's important because once we name that injustice, we also feel ownership for it. We also feel responsibility to do something about it. So guys, just for a moment, I want you to talk about these 3 things in your group. Get close enough to see, be curious enough to listen, be courageous enough to name it. And I want you to talk about what are some practical ways that you, individually or as a group, can begin to step out of your comfort zone and do these things in order to help you better see the injustice around you. Listen, I know that so many of you really see and care greatly about injustice. I also believe that you can be the generation to do something in areas that have just seemed impossible to do something about in the past, to do amazing things in this area. But the first step, guys, is to see that it's happening. The first step in doing something about it is to see it, to see that it's real, to see the injustice around us. And so as you head out tonight, I want you to think about this quote from Maya Angelou, a famous writer who wrote about injustice often. She said this: "Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better." And that's what this series is. Seeing injustice, seeing it better so that we can know better and then ultimately do better.